In the forgotten depths of Coruscant, where sunlight never reaches and the Republic's laws hold no power, something began to hunt. A figure dressed in blood red emerged from shadows older than memory itself, walking through blaster fire as though it were nothing more than summer rain, draining the life from his victims with a smile that promised both damnation and release. The Jedi who found him discovered something far worse than a Sith, far older than the dark side, a predator who existed outside the Force itself and could not be killed by any weapon the galaxy had ever forged. When immortality meets a universe built on balance, when a creature that feeds on death walks among those who serve the light, what becomes of the line between monster and survivor? The underlevels of Coruscant had always been a place where light died. 5,000 levels below the Senate towers, beneath the transit lanes and atmospheric processors, the city became a cathedral of rust and shadow. Here, neon bled into fog. Here, the Force itself seemed to recoil, thinned by despair and the weight of 1,000,000,000,000 forgotten souls. It was a place where bounty hunters found easy marks, where spice runners vanished into warrens of corroded durasteel, and where the Republic's justice was a myth told by those who still believed in sunrise. But in the third year after the Clone Wars ended, something new arrived in the depths. Something that did not belong to the galaxy's ancient rhythms of light and shadow. Something that fed. The reports began as rumors. A cantina on level 1,313 emptied of patrons, its walls painted in arterial patterns too deliberate for gang violence. A Rhodian smuggler found drained in an alley, his green skin gone pale as ash, his eyes locked open in an expression that suggested he had seen his death coming and welcomed it. Then a Hutt enforcer, then 3 Nikto mercenaries, then an entire safe house of Black Sun operatives discovered at dawn with their throats opened and their blood pooled in geometric designs that reminded investigators of old Sith glyphs, though no Sith had been seen since Vader's fall. The bodies piled, the patterns repeated, and beneath the fear, beneath the panic that spread through the criminal syndicates like poison through veins, there was a single constant. Witnesses, the few who survived, spoke of a man in red, a man who smiled, a man who walked through blaster fire as though it were rain. The Jedi Council did not concern itself with the underlevels. They had never truly concerned themselves with the depths, not even before the Purge, not even when their order had numbered 10,000. But Quinlan Vos was not the Council. He had survived Order 66 by vanishing into the very shadows the Council ignored, moving through the underworld with the ease of a man who understood that darkness was not always evil, merely misunderstood. He had contacts, he had debts owed and favors called, and when the whispers reached him in a smoke-filled den on level 1,287, whispers of a hunter who could not be killed, who laughed as thermal detonators tore his body apart only to reform moments later, Quinlan felt the Force shudder in a way he had not experienced since the temple burned. He found the first body 3 rotations later. The warehouse squatted at the edge of a ventilation shaft, its walls slick with condensation and decades of industrial grime. The air tasted of copper and ozone. Quinlan moved through the darkness with his hand near his lightsaber, yellow blade waiting in its dormant state, his psychometric abilities reaching out to read the echoes of violence that clung to every surface. The Force whispered here, but the whispers were wrong, distorted, as though something had reached into the galaxy's fundamental nature and introduced a frequency that did not harmonize with the cosmic symphony. He felt nausea rise in his throat. He pushed it down. He had felt worse during the war. He had done worse. The body was Twi'lek, female, her leku arranged carefully on either side of her head as though she had been posed. Her skin bore no signs of struggle, no blaster burns, no ligature marks, just 2 punctures at the base of her throat, precise and clean, and a pallor that suggested every drop of blood had been drawn from her body with surgical efficiency. Quinlan knelt beside her, his fingers hovering over her cold skin. He did not need to touch her to read the imprint. Psychometry came to him as naturally as breathing, the past bleeding into his present through the conduit of the Force. He opened himself to the vision, terror, ecstasy. The two emotions wound together in a helix that made no sense. She had been afraid, yes, but beneath the fear was something else. Submission, almost rapture, as though in her final moments she had been offered something more profound than survival and had accepted the trade. Quinlan saw through her eyes, a figure approaching through the warehouse shadows, tall and impossibly composed, moving with the fluid grace of a predator that had never known the concept of prey. Red coat, red eyes, a smile that promised both damnation and understanding. The figure spoke. Quinlan could not hear the words, but he felt their weight, felt the way they wrapped around the Twi'lek's will and gently, almost lovingly, unraveled her resistance. Then teeth, then darkness, then a sensation of falling through endless crimson depths. Quinlan withdrew from the vision, gasping. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the chill. His hand found the lightsaber at his belt, seeking reassurance in its solid presence. He had touched the minds of Sith before, had felt the cold calculation of Dooku, the burning rage of Maul, the vast and terrible emptiness of Sidious himself when their paths had briefly crossed during the war. This was different. This was not the dark side. It was something adjacent to it, something that fed on life and reveled in the act of consumption. But there was no hunger for power, no desire to dominate the galaxy or bend the Force to a corrupted will. There was only appetite, only the joy of the hunt and the exquisite pleasure of the kill. "Impressive," a voice said from the darkness behind him. "Most can't even look at my leavings without retching. But you, Jedi, you dove right in. Tasted the memory. Tell me, did you enjoy it?" Quinlan spun, lightsaber igniting in a snap hiss of yellow light that pushed back the shadows. The blade hummed in his hand, its kyber crystal singing with the Force, casting angular illumination across the warehouse. He fell into a defensive stance, Shi'an form, his offhand extended to channel the Force if needed. His eyes scanned the darkness beyond the blade's reach. The man who stepped into the light should not have been possible. He was tall, taller than any human had right to be, his frame suggesting strength without bulk, predatory leanness wrapped in a coat the color of arterial blood. The coat moved in a wind that did not exist, its fabric seeming to possess a life independent of its wearer. Beneath it, he wore black, all of it immaculate despite the filth of the underlevels. His hair was black as the space between stars, falling past his shoulders in a cascade that framed a face too perfect to be natural. But it was the eyes that stopped Quinlan's breath. Red as molten kyber, red as a Sith blade, red as fresh spilled blood under emergency lighting. They held an intelligence that was vast and ancient and utterly, terrifyingly amused. "You're wondering if I'm Sith," the man said, taking a step closer. His boots made no sound on the Durasteel floor. "I can see it in the way you hold that lovely little blade. The answer is no. I'm something much older, much simpler, much more honest. Stay where you are," Quinlan commanded, his voice steady despite the way the Force screamed warnings in the back of his mind. "I don't know what you are, but this ends now. The killing stops." The man laughed. It was a rich sound, full of genuine delight, the kind of laugh that belonged at a festival or a wedding, not in a charnel house 5,000 levels below daylight. "Oh, Jedi, dear, valiant, delusional Jedi, do you truly believe you can stop me? Do you truly believe your light, your righteousness, your precious connection to the Force gives you power over something like me?" He spread his arms wide, a gesture of invitation or mockery. Quinlan could not tell which. "I am Alucard. I am the no-life king. I am damnation given form and purpose. I have walked through empires older than your republic. I have drunk the blood of gods and devils and everything in between, and I have come to this filthy, beautiful, desperate galaxy to see if anything here can make me feel alive." Quinlan did not wait for more words. He moved, the force flowing through him as he closed the distance in 3 rapid strides, his lightsaber cutting upward in a strike meant to sever the man's arm at the shoulder. The blade connected. He felt the resistance of flesh and bone, smelled cauterized tissue. The arm fell away in a shower of sparks and smoke, tumbling to the ground, still wrapped in its red sleeve. Alucard looked down at the stump of his shoulder, then back up at Quinlan. The smile never wavered. "That," he said, his voice filled with dark appreciation, "was rude." The stump erupted, not blood, but shadow. Writhing, impossible shadow that defied the lightsaber's illumination, that moved with alien geometry and purpose. The mass coiled and reformed, and within seconds a new arm grew from the wound, fingers flexing experimentally, the red sleeve knitting itself back together as though reality had simply edited out the violence. Alucard rotated his shoulder, testing the range of motion. "Better than the original, actually. You have my thanks." Quinlan stepped back, his mind racing. Regeneration was not unheard of in the galaxy. Certain species possessed remarkable healing factors. Force users could accelerate their recovery through meditation. But this was instant. This was resurrection in real time. Flesh and fabric and bone reignited from nothing through a mechanism that felt antithetical to the Force itself. He reached out through the living Force, trying to sense the man's presence, trying to find the thread of life that connected all beings to the cosmic weave. There was nothing. Not darkness, not void, not even the horrible absence that surrounded a wound in the Force. Alucard simply did not register. He was a dead space in the shape of a man, a paradox that moved and spoke and smiled but possessed no more connection to the Force than a stone or a droid. And yet he was alive, impossibly, undeniably alive. "You can't sense me, can you?" Alucard asked, taking another step forward. He moved like silk over water. "That bothers you. You, Jedi, and your Force, your precious energy field that binds everything together, and here I am, outside of it, unbound, free. Does that terrify you, Quinlan Vos? Does it make you wonder what else might exist beyond your narrow theology? How do you know my name? I make it my business to know the names of those I hunt, and those who hunt me." Alucard's smile widened, revealing teeth that were just slightly too sharp, too white, too perfect. "You've been asking questions, following my trail. I respect that. Most of your kind would have stayed away, content to let the underworld devour itself. But not you. You have darkness in you, Jedi. I can smell it. The things you've done, the lines you've crossed, the guilt that gnaws at your soul like a cancer." He inhaled deeply, savoring something invisible, delicious. Quinlan felt anger kindle in his chest. He channeled it, let it flow through him and dissipate into the Force rather than control him. He had learned that lesson the hard way during the Clone Wars, when his infiltration of Dooku's inner circle had required him to touch the dark side more deeply than any Jedi should. He had survived it. He would survive this. "I've fought monsters before, fought Sith, fought the darkness in myself. You're just another predator that needs to be put down." "Put down," Alucard repeated, tasting the words. "Like a beast. How disappointing. I expected better from you, Vos. I expected you to ask the interesting questions. What am I? Where did I come from? Why do I do what I do? Instead, you reduce me to a problem that needs solving, a threat to be eliminated." He sighed, a sound of genuine regret. "Very well. If you insist on playing the hero, let's see how long you last." He moved. Quinlan's danger sense shrieked half a second too late. Alucard closed the distance between them faster than thought, faster than a force-enhanced leap, his hand wrapping around Quinlan's throat before the Jedi could bring his lightsaber to bear. The grip was iron, unbreakable. Alucard lifted him off the ground with casual ease, holding him at eye level, studying him the way a scientist might study a particularly interesting specimen. I've fought Force users before, you know, not in this galaxy, but in realms adjacent to it. Spaces between spaces. They all had the same flaw. They relied on their power so completely that when it failed them, when they faced something their magic could not touch, they crumbled. Quinlan grabbed Alucard's wrist with both hands, channeling the force into a devastating kinetic blast designed to shatter bone. The energy flowed out of him, raw and potent, enough power to crush a speeder or blow open a blast door. It struck Alucard's arm and dissipated like mist against a mountain. The vampire did not even blink. "Harder," Alucard whispered. "Try harder." Quinlan switched tactics. He released his lightsaber, letting it fall, and thrust both palms forward in a pushing motion that sent a wave of telekinetic force outward in all directions. Crates exploded. Durasteel beams warped. The Twi'lek's corpse tumbled across the floor. Alucard stood unmoved, his hand still locked around Quinlan's throat, his expression one of paternal disappointment. "Is that all? After everything you've survived, everything you've endured, this is the extent of your power?" He tightened his grip. Quinlan felt his windpipe compress, felt his vision begin to tunnel. Pathetic. Then Alucard's head jerked to the side, his attention caught by something beyond the warehouse. His eyes narrowed. His smile faded into something more serious, more calculating. He released Quinlan, letting him drop to the floor in a heap. The Jedi gasped for air, his hands going to his bruised throat, his lightsaber flying back into his palm through the force. Alucard ignored him, his gaze distant. "Interesting. It seems we have an audience. Tell me, Jedi, how many of your kind survived your order's purge?" Quinlan climbed to his feet, his breathing ragged, his mind still reeling from the casual display of power. "Enough. Not nearly enough, I suspect." Alucard's smile returned, but there was no humor in it now, only anticipation. "They're coming, not for me, for you. You've been marked, Voss, hunted by your own kind for crimes you committed in the name of survival, betrayal, murder. The things you did to stay alive when the galaxy turned against you." He began walking toward the warehouse exit, his coat billowing behind him. "I'll leave you to it. I have other prey to attend to. But know this, Jedi, I will be watching. And when you fall, when your precious light finally drowns in all that lovely darkness you try so hard to suppress, I'll be there to offer you a choice. Embrace what you are, or die knowing you could have been so much more." He vanished. Not teleportation, not force-aided speed. He simply ceased to exist in that location, his form dissolving into shadow that scattered like smoke in a breeze. Quinlan stood alone in the warehouse, his chest heaving, his mind trying to process what had just happened. The Force still screamed warnings. But the danger was no longer from Alucard. It was from the ship that descended through the ventilation shaft with predatory precision, its searchlights cutting through the gloom, its weapon systems powering up with a whine that promised violence. Quinlan ran. The ship was an old consular-class cruiser, retrofitted with military-grade shields and weapons that had no place on a diplomatic vessel. It settled into position above the warehouse, its landing struts crushing rusted walkways, its boarding ramp extending like a tongue. Figures descended, 6 of them, moving with the coordinated precision of trained killers. They wore armor cobbled together from clone trooper pieces and scavenged Mandalorian plates, their faces hidden behind helmets that bore no insignia. But Quinlan did not need to see their faces to know what they were. He felt them in the Force, felt the training, the discipline, the cold purpose. These were not bounty hunters. These were Jedi hunters. Inquisitors, perhaps, or the remnants of some other Imperial program designed to eliminate survivors of Order 66. He ducked into a side passage, his lungs burning, his throat still aching from Alucard's grip. The underlevels were a maze. He knew them better than most, had spent years learning their secrets, but his pursuers had technology on their side. Motion sensors, life-form scanners, comlink coordination. He heard them splitting up, heard their voices crackling over encrypted channels, heard the cold efficiency with which they triangulated his position. He needed an advantage. He needed time to think. He found neither. The passage opened into a plaza, one of the larger communal spaces where undercity denizens gathered to trade and socialize under the glow of ancient neon advertisements. It was empty now, cleared out by the violence that had been plaguing the level, its stalls abandoned and its fountain dry. Quinlan emerged into the open space and immediately realized his mistake. The plaza had only 2 other exits, both of them blocked by the hunters who had flanked him. He was surrounded, trapped in a killing box, with nowhere to run. The lead hunter stepped forward, her helmet retracting to reveal a human face marked by scars and augmentations. Her right eye was a cybernetic implant that glowed a faint red, scanning him with machine precision. Quinlan Voss. You're wanted for crimes against the Empire. Surrender your lightsaber and come with us. Resist and we're authorized to bring you in pieces. The Empire fell, Quinlan said, his hand resting on his lightsaber. He counted exits in his mind, calculated angles, prepared himself for violence. Vader's dead. The Emperor's dead. Whatever you think you're serving doesn't exist anymore. The Empire never dies, the woman said. Her voice carried the flat certainty of a zealot. It evolves, it adapts, it finds new forms. We are the remnant. We are the inheritors of the true order, and we do not tolerate the Jedi. Quinlan ignited his lightsaber. The yellow blade cast harsh shadows across the plaza. Then I guess we do this the hard way. They attacked as one. Blaster fire converged on his position from 3 angles, red bolts searing through the air with lethal intent. Quinlan moved through the force, his body responding before his conscious mind registered the threat, his lightsaber spinning in defensive patterns that deflected the bolts back toward their sources. One hunter went down with her own shot through the chest. Another dove behind cover, his armor smoking. The woman with the cybernetic eye drew a lightsaber, its blade igniting in a crimson hiss that sent a spike of cold fear through Quinlan's gut. She was trained. Properly trained. Not just some Imperial fanatic with a stolen weapon. She came at him in a blur of motion, her bladework fluid and aggressive, each strike designed to probe his defenses and create openings for her companions. Quinlan met her attack, his own style shifting to match hers, Shien giving way to Ataru's acrobatic mobility. He needed to keep moving, needed to prevent them from pinning him down. He leapt over her guard, his boot catching her shoulder, and used the impact to propel himself toward the nearest exit. Blaster fire chased him. He deflected what he could, absorbed what he couldn't with the Force, feeling the impacts drain his strength, feeling exhaustion creep into his muscles. He made it 3 meters before the sonic grenade detonated. The blast wave hit him like a physical blow, disrupting his connection to the Force, sending him tumbling across the Duracrete with his ears ringing and his vision swimming. He rolled to his feet, barely, his lightsaber somehow still in his hand, and found himself facing 4 opponents in a semicircle that left him nowhere to go. The woman stalked forward, her red blade held low in a killing stance. Last chance, Voss. Surrender or die. How about option 3? The voice came from above. Quinlan looked up through his blurred vision and saw a figure perched on the edge of a rusted balcony. His red coat spread around him like wings. Alucard smiled down at the tableau, his expression one of delighted interest. "This is fascinating. Jedi hunting Jedi. The Empire's dogs still nipping at heels even after their master has been put down. Tell me, do you hunters ever question what you're doing, or is blind obedience all you have left?" The woman spun toward the new threat, her lightsaber raised. "Identify yourself." "I am the monster your empire should have feared more than any Jedi." Alucard dropped from the balcony, falling 20 meters to land with cat-like grace that should have shattered his legs. He straightened, adjusting his coat, his red eyes sweeping across the hunters with predatory assessment. "I am the thing that reminds arrogant men they are still prey. And you, dear hunter, have wandered into my feeding ground." "Target him," the woman commanded. "Lethal force authorized." The remaining hunters opened fire. Bolts converged on Alucard's position, enough concentrated energy to vaporize Duraplast. The vampire stood in the center of the storm, making no attempt to dodge, letting the shots tear through him in eruptions of cauterized flesh and shadow. His chest exploded. His head snapped back with half his skull missing. His left arm vaporized at the elbow. He stood through it all, his body jerking with each impact, his smile never wavering. When the firing stopped, when the hunter's weapons cycled down from overheating, Alucard looked down at the ruin of his torso and laughed. The wounds closed. Shadow boiled from the injuries, knitting flesh and bone and fabric together with obscene speed. Within seconds he was whole again, pristine, untouched. He brushed imaginary dust from his coat. That was invigorating. "Shall we continue?" Panic entered the hunter's body language. Quinlan saw it in the way they stepped back, saw it in the tremor that ran through the woman's blade. They had not expected this, had not prepared for an enemy that could not be killed by conventional means. The woman recovered first, her voice sharp over the comlink. "Fall back to the ship. Orbital strike authorization requested. Coordinates uploaded." Alucard tilted his head. "Orbital strike? How delightfully excessive. But I'm afraid I can't let you leave just yet. You see, I've developed a taste for zealots. They have a unique flavor, conviction mixed with fear, duty laced with doubt, exquisite." He moved then, and Quinlan finally understood why the witnesses had described him as impossible. Alucard did not run. He flowed. His form dissolved into mist and shadow, reforming behind the nearest hunter before the man could react. Long fingers wrapped around the hunter's helmet, and with a twist that should not have generated enough torque, Alucard wrenched the man's head completely around with a crack that echoed across the plaza. The body dropped. Alucard was already gone, already at the next target, his hand plunging through chest armor and into flesh with surgical precision. He withdrew, holding the hunter's still beating heart, regarded it with clinical interest, then crushed it. Blood ran between his fingers. The woman with the cybernetic eye charged him with a scream of pure rage, her lightsaber cutting through the space where Alucard had been standing. She was fast, trained by Jedi, perhaps, or by one of the Inquisitors who had learned from Vader himself. Her blade work was textbook perfect, each strike flowing into the next without wasted motion. It did not matter. Alucard swayed between her attacks like smoke, his movements lazy and unhurried, his hands clasped behind his back as though he were watching a performance that mildly interested him. "You're quite skilled. I can see the training, the discipline. Tell me, when you butcher sleeping families of Force sensitives, do you tell yourself it's for the greater good, or have you learned to enjoy it?" She thrust at his heart. He let the blade pierce him, let it burn through his chest and out his back in a spray of cauterized tissue and steam. Then he grabbed the lightsaber's hilt, his hand wrapping around hers, and began to squeeze. The woman screamed, bones crunched. The lightsaber deactivated as her grip failed, her mangled hand releasing the weapon. Alucard caught it before it fell, examined it with the air of a collector appraising a curiosity, then tossed it aside. Crude, effective, but crude. I prefer more elegant methods." He smiled, revealing fangs that extended with a wet click. The woman tried to run. Alucard caught her by the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair, and pulled her close with terrible gentleness. "Shh! Don't struggle. It only makes it last longer." He bent to her throat, his breath cold against her skin, and whispered something Quinlan could not hear. The woman went rigid, then limp. Then she began to shake, not with fear but with something that looked disturbingly like pleasure. Alucard bit down. The woman gasped. Her body convulsed once, twice, then went still as Alucard fed, his throat working, his eyes closing in an expression of absolute contentment. Quinlan felt bile rise in his throat. He had seen violence, had committed violence, but this was something else. This was intimacy twisted into predation, the act of feeding elevated into a perverse sacrament. He forced himself to watch, forced himself to remember. This was what Alucard truly was. Not a warrior, not even a killer, a monster that transformed death into ecstasy for both predator and prey. Alucard released the woman's corpse, letting it crumple to the ground. He licked blood from his lips, his expression one of satisfaction. Mediocre vintage, but adequate. Fear and fanaticism make for an interesting bouquet. He turned to Quinlan, who still stood frozen at the plaza's edge. "Still here, Jedi? I thought you'd have run by now. Used the distraction to disappear back into whatever hole you've been hiding in." "You killed them," Quinlan said. His voice was hollow, distant. "I did, just as they would have killed you, just as you've killed others to survive." Alucard stepped over the bodies without looking down, his attention focused entirely on Quinlan. "Don't mistake me for a hero, Voss. I'm not here to save you. I'm here because you interest me, because you stand at a threshold and I want to see which way you fall. Will you cling to your Jedi teachings, your noble suffering, your belief that the light will eventually triumph? Or will you accept that the galaxy is a charnel house where the only crime is weakness?" "I'm not like you," Quinlan said. "No, not yet." Alucard stopped 3 paces away, close enough that Quinlan could smell the blood on his breath. "But you could be. I can see it in you, the potential, the cracks in your conviction. You've already compromised everything you believed in to survive this long. What's one more step? What's one more boundary crossed?" Quinlan's grip tightened on his lightsaber. He wanted to attack, wanted to cut this thing down even if it meant his own death, but his body would not obey. Fear held him paralyzed. Not fear of pain or death, but fear of the truth in Alucard's words. He had crossed lines, had done things during his infiltration of Dooku's organization that still haunted his meditations. He had told himself it was necessary, had told himself the ends justified the means. But standing here, covered in the blood of zealots who had believed their cause just as fervently as he believed his, he wondered if there was any real difference. "Nothing to say?" Alucard asked. "No denial? No righteous speech about the power of hope and the strength of the light?" When Quinlan remained silent, the vampire nodded as though confirming a hypothesis. "Good. Honesty suits you better than platitudes. Now listen carefully, Jedi. I'm going to give you a gift. I'm going to tell you exactly where I'll be tomorrow at sunset. Level 959, the old industrial sector near the reactor substations. Come alone, come prepared. And we'll see if you have what it takes to stop me. Or if you'll finally admit that you want to join me." He walked past Quinlan toward the plaza's 3rd exit, his coat trailing behind him like spilled blood. "One last thing," he called over his shoulder. "That ship they mentioned? The one with orbital strike capabilities? It's still up there, still tracking you, still waiting for orders that will never come now that I've killed their ground team. You have approximately 12 hours before they decide to simply glass this entire sector and count it as a successful mission. I'd suggest you find a way off this level." unless you'd prefer to burn with all the other wretches who call this place home." Then he was gone, dissolved into shadow that seeped into cracks in the duracrete and vanished. Quinlan stood alone among corpses. Above him, through 5,000 levels of city and cloud, the ship waited. He could feel it now. Feel the cold mechanical patience of its crew. Feel the way they calculated odds and weighed acceptable losses. Alucard was right. They would fire, would reduce this section to molten slag, and file a report that sanitized the massacre into strategic necessity. He had 12 hours. 12 hours to warn the thousands of beings who lived on this level, to evacuate them through transit tunnels and maintenance shafts, to do something, anything, that resembled the heroism he had once believed defined the Jedi. Or he could run, could save himself and let the underlevels burn. He deactivated his lightsaber, clipped it to his belt, began walking toward the nearest comm station. The Force whispered approval, but beneath it, so faint he almost missed it, he heard another whisper, darker, hungrier, promising that there was a third option, a better option, one that involved red eyes and immortality and the sweet release of no longer having to choose. Quinlan walked faster. The evacuation took 4 hours. 4 hours of shouting at confused residents, of organizing impromptu caravans through maintenance tunnels, of calling in every favor he had accumulated in the underworld to secure transports and temporary shelter on levels that would not be targeted. The Force flowed through him as he worked, lending him strength and clarity, connecting him to the hundreds of individuals he was trying to save in a web of shared desperation. Some listened, some fled, some stayed, either too stubborn or too fatalistic to believe that the powers above would actually commit such an atrocity. Quinlan could not save them all, could not force them to abandon their homes, could only do what he could and hope it was enough. When the evacuation was complete, when the last transport had lifted off toward the relative safety of level 2000, Quinlan collapsed against a wall in an abandoned cantina and let exhaustion claim him. He slept for 3 hours. His dreams filled with red eyes and dark offers, with the faces of those he had failed to save and those he had failed to become. When he woke, the chrono on his wrist told him sunset was approaching. Sunset in the underlevels was arbitrary, a scheduled dimming of artificial lights that mimicked the cycle of the world above. But it served as a marker, a rendezvous. Quinlan stood, stretched, checked his lightsaber, then began walking toward level 959. The industrial sector was a graveyard of ambition. Decades ago, it had housed factories that produced speeders and droids for the Republic's insatiable appetite. Now it was rust and silence, its assembly lines frozen in mid-cycle, its power substations bleeding plasma through cracked containment vessels. The reactor substations themselves were massive cylindrical structures that fed energy to the levels above, their cores humming with barely contained fusion reactions that would burn for millennia, even with no one left to tend them. It was, Quinlan realized as he navigated the broken catwalks and shattered conveyor systems, the perfect place for a final confrontation. Remote, structurally unstable, with enough ambient energy to mask their presence from sensors. He found Alucard standing on a platform overlooking Reactor 7, his silhouette framed against the blue-white glow of plasma vents. The vampire had his hands in his pockets, his coat pulled tight against the heat, his expression contemplative. He did not turn as Quinlan approached. "You came. I wasn't certain you would. Most Jedi would have fled by now, content to let me be someone else's problem." "I'm not most Jedi," Quinlan said. He stopped 10 paces away, his hand resting on his lightsaber, but not yet drawing it. "You wanted to talk, so talk. Direct, I appreciate that." Alucard finally turned, his red eyes reflecting the reactor's glow. "Very well. Let me ask you a question, Quinlan Voss. What do you believe happens after death?" The question caught Quinlan off guard. He had expected threats, philosophical posturing, not theology. The Force, we return to it, become one with it. Some Jedi believe they can retain their consciousness, become Force spirits that guide the living. Others believe in complete dissolution, the self scattered across the cosmic whole. How comforting, Alucard said, his tone making it unclear whether he was mocking or sincere. To believe that death is merely transformation, that the self continues in some form, that consciousness persists beyond the body's failure. I envy you that faith, I truly do. What do you believe? Alucard smiled, but there was no humor in it, only a vast and terrible weariness that seemed at odds with his earlier manic energy. I believe in nothing. I am nothing. I am the corpse of a man who died centuries ago in a war he cannot remember fighting, sustained by powers I barely understand, wandering through realities that blur together until I can no longer tell one slaughter from another. I feed to exist. I exist to feed. There is no purpose, no growth, no change. Only the endless repetition of hunt and kill and feed, world after world, prey after prey, until the universe itself grows cold and I am finally, mercifully, allowed to stop. Quinlan felt something shift in his perception of the vampire. The monster before him was not reveling in evil. He was drowning in it, trapped in an immortality that had become its own prison, seeking something, anything, that might justify continued existence. Then why keep going? Why not just stop? Let yourself fade. Because I can't, Alucard said simply. I've tried. Gods, I've tried. Walked into suns. Let armies tear me apart. Starved myself for decades until the hunger became an agony that eclipsed thought itself. It doesn't matter. I always come back. Always reform. Always hunger again. The only thing that brings me anything resembling peace is the fight. The challenge. The moment when I face something that might, just might, be strong enough to grant me oblivion. He spread his arms wide, a gesture of invitation. So here I am, Jedi, offering you a chance to be that something. Fight me. Pour everything you have, everything your precious force can channel, into trying to end me. And if you succeed, if you find a way to break through centuries of accumulated damnation and finally kill me, then you'll have saved this galaxy from a predator it was never meant to face. And I'll have found the peace I've been seeking since before your republic was born. Quinlan ignited his lightsaber. The yellow blade hummed to life, its light harsh against the reactor's glow. And if I can't kill you, then I'll make you an offer. Power. Immortality. Freedom from the burden of your guilt and the weight of your failures. I'll show you how to transform your connection to the Force into something transcendent, something that doesn't require you to constantly choose between light and dark, because you'll have moved beyond such limiting concepts entirely. You'll become what I am, what I was meant to be before I lost my way. A guardian who protects through fear rather than hope, who understands that sometimes the only way to preserve life is to become the thing life most fears. I'll never become like you, Quinlan said. We'll see. Alucard's coat began to ripple, its fabric moving with unnatural motion. Shadows pooled around his feet, thick and viscous. Show me your light, Jedi. Show me if it burns bright enough to matter. Quinlan attacked with everything he had. He opened himself to the Force completely, letting it flow through him without reservation or control, channeling years of training and combat experience into an assault that combined lightsaber technique with raw telekinetic power. He closed the distance in a single Force-enhanced leap, his blade cutting through the air in a pattern designed to overwhelm through sheer aggression. Alucard met the attack with bare hands, his palms catching the lightsaber's blade between them, holding it steady despite the energy that should have severed his fingers. Steam rose from his flesh. He smiled through the pain. Quinlan released the lightsaber, letting it fall, and thrust both hands forward to unleash a force push that had enough power behind it to crumple Duraplast. The blast caught Alucard in the chest and sent him flying backward off the platform, his body tumbling through empty air toward the reactor's intake vents hundreds of meters below. Quinlan reached out, caught his falling lightsaber through the force, and watched as Alucard plummeted toward what should have been instant vaporization. The vampire caught himself mid-fall, his coat spread wide, impossibly wide, transforming into bat-like wings that caught the updrafts from the reactor's heat. He hovered there, suspended on thermals and unnatural biology, his body outlined in blue-white radiance. Then he shot upward, propelled by muscles that defied physics, his form blurring with speed as he rocketed back toward the platform. Quinlan met him with a horizontal slash that would have bisected any normal opponent. Alucard twisted in midair, his body bending at angles that should have required a boneless physiology, and landed behind Quinlan with his hand already reaching for the Jedi's throat. Quinlan spun into the grab, his elbow striking Alucard's wrist with force-enhanced strength that shattered bone. The vampire's hand went limp. Quinlan followed with an upward cut that opened Alucard from hip to shoulder, the lightsaber's blade carving through flesh with a hiss of cauterized tissue. Alucard staggered. His coat began to smoke. His eyes widened in what might have been surprise or delight. Yes, more like that. The bisected halves of his torso held together for a moment, connected by strings of shadow and impossible biology. Then they snapped back into place with a wet sound that made Quinlan's stomach turn. Alucard laughed, deep and rich, and punched Quinlan in the sternum with his regenerated hand. The blow had the force of a speeder collision behind it. Quinlan flew backward, crashing through a corroded railing and rolling to a stop at the edge of another platform. He tasted blood, felt ribs creak, pushed himself upright through sheer stubborn will. The force warned him too late. Alucard was already there, moving faster than Quinlan could track, his fist driving into the Jedi's kidney with precision that spoke of centuries of anatomical knowledge. Quinlan collapsed, his legs giving out, his lightsaber clattering from nerveless fingers. Pain whited out his vision. He channeled the force into healing, trying to repair internal damage, trying to stay conscious. Alucard crouched beside him, his expression one of clinical interest. Your body is shutting down. Shock. Internal bleeding. Your force healing can only do so much before exhaustion claims you. I could end this now, but where would be the poetry in that? He stood, walked to where Quinlan's lightsaber lay, picked it up, examined it. The blade ignited at his touch, its yellow light casting sharp shadows across his face. Fascinating. I can feel the energy, feel the way it wants to burn me, but it's just a tool, no more dangerous than any other blade once you understand its nature. He deactivated it, tossed it back to Quinlan, who caught it instinctively. Get up, Jedi. We're not done, not by a long measure. Quinlan climbed to his feet, using his lightsaber as a crutch. Every breath sent spikes of agony through his chest. His connection to the Force was fraying, exhaustion and pain eroding his ability to channel it effectively. But he was still standing, still fighting, still refusing to give Alucard what he wanted. Why are you doing this? If you want death so badly, why not just let me kill you? Because I need to know you're worthy, Alucard said. I've faced thousands of opponents, killed tens of thousands more. Most were insects, irritations, prey that barely registered as alive. But occasionally, very occasionally, I find someone who challenges me, who forces me to use more than a fraction of my power, who makes me remember what it felt like to be mortal and afraid and desperately, beautifully alive. He began walking toward Quinlan, his steps measured and deliberate. You're close, Voss. Closer than most. But you're holding back. Afraid of what you might become if you truly let go. Afraid that if you embrace the darkness inside you, You'll lose whatever shred of identity still defines you as a Jedi." "I'm not afraid," Quinlan lied. "No?" Alucard's smile was knowing. "Then prove it. Stop fighting with one hand tied behind your back. Stop pretending you're still the hero you were before Order 66. You survived because you were willing to do what others wouldn't. To lie, to betray, to kill in ways that would make your old masters weep. The darkness is still in you. I can taste it on the air. Use it, channel it. Show me what Quinlan Vos looks like when he stops apologizing for being alive." Quinlan felt something break inside him, some final restraint he had been maintaining since the purge. He reached into the Force, but this time he did not seek the light, did not meditate on peace or serenity or the noble suffering of the Jedi way. He reached for the anger, the guilt, the howling rage at a galaxy that had betrayed everything he believed in and demanded he justify his survival. He pulled that darkness into himself, let it fill the places where his strength had failed, let it fuel his body beyond its natural limits. His wounds closed, his vision sharpened, his lightsaber ignited with a sound like a scream, and he attacked with the fury of a man who had nothing left to lose. The platform became a blur of motion and light. Quinlan moved through forms he had been taught never to use, aggressive sequences that prioritized damage over defense, that treated the lightsaber not as an elegant weapon, but as an instrument of pure destruction. He carved through support struts, shattered containment vessels, sent geysers of superheated plasma erupting into the air as he drove Alucard backward across the industrial graveyard. The vampire met each strike with impossible speed, his hands deflecting the blade through combinations of pressure and timing that should not have worked against a weapon of pure energy. But Quinlan did not relent, did not pause, poured everything he had into a sustained assault that turned the reactor platform into a killing ground. Alucard's coat caught fire. He shrugged out of it, let it burn, his underlying black suit now exposed. Quinlan's blade caught his shoulder, severed his arm at the bicep. The limb tumbled away, trailing shadow. Alucard's smile never faltered. Better. Much better. He lashed out with his remaining hand, his fingers extended like talons, and raked them across Quinlan's face with enough force to open the Jedi's cheek to the bone. Blood ran hot down Quinlan's neck. He ignored it, spun into a reverse grip strike that buried his lightsaber in Alucard's chest, pushing until the blade emerged from the vampire's back in a spray of steam and cauterized flesh. They stood frozen for a moment, face to face, Quinlan's blade through Alucard's heart, their breath mingling in the superheated air. Alucard looked down at the wound, then up at Quinlan. "You're learning, but this still won't kill me." He wrapped his remaining hand around the lightsaber's blade, grabbed it and pulled it deeper into his own chest, his flesh smoking, his smile widening into something ecstatic. "Nothing will kill me. Don't you understand yet? I am already dead, have been dead for longer than your order existed. You can't kill a corpse, Jedi. You can only make it stop moving." He wrenched the lightsaber free, tearing it from Quinlan's grip, and tossed it aside. Then he grabbed Quinlan by the throat and lifted him off the ground, holding him at eye level as his severed arm regenerated in a cascade of shadow and blood. "I'm disappointed. I thought you might actually reach the level I needed, but you're still too afraid, still too broken, still clinging to the belief that there's a way to be good in a galaxy that punishes goodness." Quinlan's vision dimmed, his struggles weakened. Alucard's grip was absolute, crushing his windpipe, cutting off oxygen and blood flow to his brain. Through the growing darkness, he heard the vampire speak, his voice distant and distorted. "I'm going to give you one last chance. Stop resisting. Stop fighting. Let me in. Let me show you what you could become if you just surrendered to the hunger I can feel eating at your soul. Or die here, unmourned and forgotten, another failure in a galaxy that has forgotten how to honor its fallen." Quinlan's hand, acting on instinct and reflex, found the small thermal detonator clipped to his belt. A gift from his smuggler contacts. Insurance for situations exactly like this. His thumb found the activation stud. Pressed it. The device, armed with a high-pitched whine that cut through the reactor's ambient hum. Alucard's eyes widened. He released Quinlan, throwing him aside, and looked down at the detonator now magnetically attached to his chest. "Clever," he said. "Futile, but clever." The detonator exploded with enough force to vaporize everything within a 5-meter radius. The shockwave slammed into Quinlan, throwing him off the platform, his body tumbling through space as the world dissolved into light and heat and noise. He hit something solid, felt bones crack, felt consciousness slip away like water through his fingers. The last thing he saw before the darkness claimed him was Alucard's form dissolving into vapor and shadow, scattered across the industrial sector in 1,000 burning fragments. Then nothing. Quinlan woke to pain. Every nerve in his body screamed. His head throbbed. His chest felt like someone had replaced his ribs with broken glass. He was lying on cold duracrit, staring up at corroded pipes that wept condensation in a steady rhythm. He had no idea how long he had been unconscious. Minutes, hours. The chrono on his wrist was shattered, its face spider-webbed with cracks. He turned his head, searching for his lightsaber, and found it 3 meters away, its casing scorched, but intact. He reached for it through the Force, pulled it to his hand, held it against his chest like a talisman. Alucard was gone. The platform where they had fought was a twisted ruin, its support beams melted, its surface pockmarked with blast craters. Quinlan allowed himself a moment of hope. Maybe the detonator had worked. Maybe the vampire had finally found the oblivion he sought. Maybe it was over. Then he heard applause. Slow, measured, mocking. Quinlan turned his head toward the sound and felt his hope die. Alucard stood 20 meters away, leaning against a reactor support column with his arms crossed and an expression of paternal disappointment on his perfect face. He was whole, unmarked. His coat had even regenerated, hanging from his shoulders as though it had never burned. That was unexpected. I'll grant you that. A thermal detonator at point-blank range while I was distracted. Very pragmatic, very un-Jedi-like. I'm almost proud. How? Quinlan's voice was a ruined rasp. How are you still alive? I told you, Alucard said, pushing off from the column and walking toward him. I can't die. Not by conventional means. Not by any means you have access to. You can scatter me, burn me, reduce me to atoms, but I always reform, always return. It's the nature of what I am, the curse I carry. He crouched beside Quinlan, studying him with the clinical interest of a scientist examining a failed experiment. You fought well. Better than I expected after your initial showing. You even managed to tap into the darkness I knew was there, but it wasn't enough. It will never be enough. Not while you're still trying to be something you're not. Quinlan tried to move, tried to summon the Force, tried to do anything other than lie helpless on the cold duracrete. His body refused to obey. Exhaustion had claimed him completely, his reserves depleted, his connection to the Force reduced to a faint whisper that could barely sustain consciousness. Kill me then. If I'm such a disappointment, just end it. No, Alucard said. I don't think I will. I think I'm going to let you live. Let you carry the weight of what happened here. Let you remember that you gave everything you had and it still wasn't enough. He stood, looking down at Quinlan with something that might have been pity. That orbital strike you were so concerned about? It launched 30 seconds ago. 6 missiles, each with enough yield to turn this entire sector into slag. They'll impact in approximately 4 minutes. I'd suggest you find shelter, but I don't think you're in any condition to move. You're leaving me to die, Quinlan said. I'm giving you a choice, Alucard corrected. You can lie here and burn with this level. Embrace the death you seem so eager for. Or you can let me carry you to safety, save you from the consequences of your heroism, and spend the rest of your life knowing that you owe your survival to the monster you tried to kill. Either way, you lose. Either way, I win. Quinlan closed his eyes. He felt the missiles approaching through the Force, felt their cold mechanical certainty, felt the thousands of lives still scattered across this level, the ones who had refused to evacuate or had returned too soon. He could die here, could let it end, could finally stop carrying the weight of survival and guilt and compromise. It would be easy, it would be peace, but it would also be surrender. And despite everything, despite the pain and the exhaustion and the creeping despair, Quinlan Vos was not ready to surrender. "Save me," he whispered. Alucard smiled. It was not a kind smile. "As you wish." The vampire lifted him with impossible gentleness, cradling him like a child, and then they were moving, faster than Quinlan's battered senses could process. The world blurred, wind screamed past. The reactor platform fell away behind them, dwindling to a point of blue-white light in the darkness. Alucard carried him through the underlevels with inhuman speed, navigating the maze of tunnels and shafts with perfect certainty, moving always toward safety, always toward higher levels. Behind them, Quinlan felt the missiles impact, felt the plasma warheads detonate, felt the industrial sector vaporize in a cascade of heat that turned metal to gas and gas to plasma. Thousands died in an instant. Thousands more would die from the radiation and structural collapse. And he lived, saved by the monster he had failed to stop. Alucard deposited him on a landing pad on level 3000, far above the blast zone, far enough that the shockwave would reach here only as a distant tremor. He laid Quinlan down on cold duraplast, arranged him with his back against a supply crate, made sure his lightsaber was within reach. Then he stepped back, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. There, safe, alive, tormented by survivor's guilt and the knowledge that you achieved nothing except proving my point. "How does it feel, Jedi?" Quinlan said nothing. His throat was too raw for words, his mind too fractured for coherent thought. He simply stared at Alucard, trying to understand what he was looking at, trying to reconcile the monster that had killed dozens with the creature that had just saved his life. "I'll be watching you," Alucard said, "waiting to see what you do next, waiting to see if you finally embrace what you are or if you cling to your delusions until they consume you. And when you're ready, when you've finally accepted that the galaxy doesn't reward virtue and the Force doesn't care who suffers, find me. I'll be waiting. I'll always be waiting." He turned to leave, his coat billowing in a wind that existed only around him. Then he paused, looked back over his shoulder, and spoke one final time. "Oh, and Vos? Thank you. That was the most fun I've had in decades. You may not have given me death, but you gave me something almost as valuable. You gave me hope that this galaxy might actually be worth destroying, that somewhere in its quadrillions of souls, there might be someone who can finally set me free." He walked to the landing pad's edge and stepped off, falling into the darkness between levels, his laughter echoing behind him long after his form had disappeared. Quinlan sat alone on the landing pad, broken and alive, as the night deepened around him and the underlevels burned below. Above him, through kilometers of city and cloud, the stars waited with their cold and indifferent light. He had survived, again, and he hated himself for it. The Force whispered that his trial was not yet over. Deep in the underlevels, in places the orbital strike had not reached, Alucard walked through shadows that welcomed him like a returning prince. His hunt had only just begun. The galaxy would learn to fear the dark once more. 3 rotations passed before Quinlan could stand without assistance. He spent them in a safe house, maintained by one of his underworld contacts, a Deveronian who owed him enough favors not to ask questions about the burns and broken bones. The Deveronian brought him back to patches and medkits, smuggled rations and clean water, and news from the levels above. The orbital strike was being blamed on a reactor malfunction. The deaths, all 7,214 of them, were being classified as an industrial accident. The Empire's remnant forces, the ones who had hunted Quinlan, were denying any involvement. The whole thing would be forgotten within a week, buried under the endless churn of Coruscant's daily atrocities. Quinlan healed his body through a combination of Force meditation and Bacta, pushing himself beyond what was wise, forcing broken bones to knit and torn muscles to regenerate. But the deeper wounds, the ones that lived in his spirit, remained untouched. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Alucard's smile, heard his offer, felt the terrible truth in his words. The galaxy did not reward virtue, the Force did not protect the innocent, and Quinlan Vos, for all his training and conviction, was alive only because a monster had permitted it. On the fourth day, he left the safe house. His body was not fully recovered, but waiting would not make him stronger. He needed to understand what Alucard was, needed to find out where he had come from and what he truly wanted, and he needed to do it before more people died in the vampire's wake. He began his investigation in the places where information flowed like spice, the cantinas and gambling dens where beings spoke freely because they believed the underlevels existed beyond the reach of consequence. The name Alucard meant nothing to most, but there were older beings, creatures who had lived centuries and remembered times before the Republic, who recognized something in Quinlan's description. A Hutt information broker, ancient and corpulent, spoke of legends from the unknown regions, of predator species that fed on blood and shadow, that existed outside the Force's touch, that had been driven to the galaxy's edge by Rakatan slavers millennia ago. A Sith holocron, one Quinlan had seized during the war and kept hidden in violation of Jedi code, whispered of experiments performed by Dark Lords who sought immortality through the transformation of flesh into something beyond life and death. None of it gave him what he needed. None of it explained how to stop something that could not die. He was working a lead on a black market Force artifact dealer when he felt it. A disturbance in the Force so profound it made him stagger, his hand shooting out to steady himself against a corroded wall. The sensation was familiar now, wrong in the specific way that accompanied Alucard's presence. But this time it was different, amplified, as though the vampire was no longer hiding his nature but broadcasting it across the underlevels like a challenge. Quinlan reached out through the Force, trying to pinpoint the source, and found it 15 levels down. Sector 47C, an abandoned medical facility that had once treated workers from the industrial sectors before the work dried up and the doctors moved to more profitable markets. Quinlan arrived to find the facility lit from within by emergency lighting that cast red shadows across operating theaters that had not been used in decades. The smell hit him before he entered, copper and rot and something chemical, like preservatives or embalming fluid. He ignited his lightsaber, its yellow glow providing additional illumination, and moved through the corridors with his danger sense screaming. The Force here was twisted, polluted by something that felt almost like the dark side, but fundamentally different in texture and intention. He followed the feeling deeper, past examination rooms and supply closets, toward the sound of voices engaged in conversation. He found Alucard in what had once been the facility's surgery suite. The vampire sat in an operating chair, his coat draped over the armrest, examining a datapad with casual interest. Around him, arranged in a semicircle like supplicants before a throne, knelt 6 figures in dark robes. Their faces were hidden by hoods. Their hands bore tattoos that Quinlan recognized from his time infiltrating the Separatists. Death cult symbology. The kind of desperate zealots who worshipped entropy and believed suffering was the universe's natural state. Alucard looked up as Quinlan entered, his red eyes reflecting the surgical lights. "Quinlan, how punctual. I was beginning to think you'd lost your nerve." "What is this?" Quinlan demanded, his lightsaber held ready. "What are you doing?" "Recruiting," Alucard said simply. He gestured to the kneeling figures. "These faithful souls sought me out after hearing rumors of my nature. They believe I'm a dark god, a herald of apocalypse. They want to serve me, to help me spread my gift across the galaxy." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "It's quite touching, really. The depths of delusion beings will embrace when confronted with something they can't explain." One of the robed figures spoke, their voice reverent. "We offer our blood freely, Lord Alucard. Transform us. Make us instruments of your divine will. Let us become death's chosen." Alucard stood, tucking the datapad into his coat. "You hear that, Voss? They want me to bite them, want me to pass on my curse like some gift they've earned through devotion. Isn't it fascinating? The same species that invented hyperdrives and cloning technology still craves mythology, still needs to believe there's something greater than themselves, even if that something wants to devour them." "Send them away," Quinlan said. "They're just desperate people looking for meaning. Don't use them." "Why not?" Alucard's tone was genuinely curious. "They came to me, offered themselves willingly. Who am I to refuse such hospitality? Besides, I'm curious. I've never tried to create progeny in this galaxy. The Force might interact with my vampiric nature in interesting ways. These volunteers could become something entirely new, powerful, useful, or they could simply die screaming, their bodies rejecting the transformation. Either outcome advances my understanding." Quinlan raised his lightsaber. "I won't let you." "You won't let me," Alucard repeated, his smile widening. "Tell me, Jedi, exactly how do you plan to stop me? You barely survived our last encounter. You're still healing from wounds that would have killed a normal human, and yet here you are, ready to throw yourself between me and my prey once again. It's almost admirable in its futility." He moved with that impossible speed, crossing the distance between them before Quinlan could react, and grabbed the Jedi's wrist, stopping the lightsaber mid-swing. His grip was iron, unbreakable. He leaned close, his breath cold against Quinlan's ear. "But if you insist on playing the hero, then let's make this interesting. I'll offer these cultists a choice. They can serve me, accept my gift, and risk whatever transformation might result, or they can serve you. Become informants, spies in the underworld who can help you track my movements and perhaps, eventually, find a way to stop me. All 6 of them, their loyalty, their lives, their futures, all decided by which of us they find more compelling. What do you say, Voss? Shall we see who's the better prophet?" He released Quinlan and stepped back, gesturing to the kneeling figures. "Go ahead, make your pitch. Tell them about hope and light and the power of the Force to redeem even the most fallen. Convince them that serving the Jedi is preferable to serving the monster. I'll wait, I'm quite patient." Quinlan deactivated his lightsaber. He looked at the robed figures, trying to read their intentions through the Force, trying to find some thread of doubt or fear he could leverage. They felt wrong, hollow. Their presence in the Force was muted, as though they had already begun the process of separating themselves from life. These were not people who could be reasoned with. They had made their choice before coming here, but he had to try. "Listen to me," he began, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. "Whatever you think he is, whatever you believe he can offer you, it's a lie. Alucard doesn't serve any cause or ideology. He's not a god. He's not a herald of anything except his own hunger. If you give yourselves to him, you won't find purpose or power. You'll find only pain and regret, and the knowledge that you traded your humanity for a curse that will never end." One of the figures raised their head, revealing a scarred face marked by self-inflicted wounds. The Jedi betrayed the galaxy. You failed to stop the Empire, failed to protect those who trusted you. Why should we believe anything you say? Because I'm trying to save you, Quinlan said. Because despite everything that's happened, despite all the ways I've failed, I still believe that every life matters, that you deserve better than becoming someone's experiment or meal. You can still walk away from this, still choose to live rather than throwing yourselves into damnation. The scarred cultist laughed. It was a hollow sound, devoid of joy. We don't want to live, Jedi. We want to transcend. We want to become something that can finally impose meaning on a meaningless universe. If that requires sacrifice, if that requires pain, then so be it. We are not afraid. The other 5 cultists murmured agreement, their voices blending into a chant that sounded almost like prayer. Quinlan felt his hope crumble. He had failed. Again. Alucard stepped forward, his hand resting on the scarred cultist's shoulder with terrible gentleness. You heard them, Voss. They've made their choice. Now step aside and let me work, or stay and watch, or fight me and prove once again that your power is insufficient. But do not presume to tell me what I can and cannot do with those who seek me willingly. Quinlan wanted to fight, wanted to cut down Alucard where he stood, even knowing it would accomplish nothing. But he was exhausted, still healing, and some part of him, the part that had learned pragmatism through years of survival, whispered that dying here would achieve nothing except removing one more obstacle to the vampire's plans. He deactivated his lightsaber, clipped it to his belt, stepped back toward the exit. I won't stop you today, but I will find a way. I will learn what you are and where you came from, and I will end this. I look forward to it, Alucard said. He bent to the scarred cultist's neck, his fangs extending with that wet click. Now go, Jedi. You don't want to see what comes next. Quinlan fled. He ran through the medical facility's corridors as the screaming began behind him, as the cultists' prayers turned to shrieks of agony and ecstasy intermingled. As Alucard fed and experimented and transformed desperate people into something new and horrible, he ran until he reached the surface levels, until he stood beneath artificial stars and breathed air that tasted almost clean. He stood there for a long time, trembling, his mind trying to process what he had witnessed and failed to prevent. The Force offered no comfort, only the cold certainty that his trial had escalated. That Alucard was no longer content to simply hunt and feed, but was actively working to establish a presence in the galaxy, to create followers and infrastructure and all the trappings of an organization. The vampire was building something, and Quinlan had no idea how to stop him. He needed help, real help, not underworld contacts or black market dealers, but someone with resources and knowledge that went beyond what he could access alone. He needed, he realized with a sinking feeling, to contact what remained of the Jedi, to risk exposing himself to whatever forces might still be hunting survivors, to do the one thing he had avoided since Order 66 ended. He needed to come out of the shadows. The journey to Dantooine took 3 weeks. Quinlan traveled under false identities, purchased passage on smuggler vessels that asked no questions, moved always with the paranoia of a man who knew the galaxy wanted him dead. Dantooine was a world of grasslands and ancient ruins, far from the core and its watchful eyes. The old Jedi temple here had been abandoned for years, destroyed by Malak's bombardment millennia ago, then briefly restored by the Order before being abandoned again when the Clone Wars demanded every available Jedi. It was the kind of place that existed in memory rather than reality, a footnote in galactic history. It was also where the survivors met. Quinlan felt them as he approached the ruins, small presences in the Force, carefully shielded but unmistakable to someone who knew what to look for. 6 of them, maybe 7. He landed his ship in the tall grass a kilometer from the ruins and walked the rest of the way, his hands visible and empty, his lightsaber prominently displayed on his belt but not drawn. He climbed crumbling steps overgrown with vines, passed through doorways that had once been sealed by blast doors, entered a meditation chamber where sunlight fell through holes in the ceiling and illuminated figures who waited with weapons ready. He recognized 3 of them. Jocasta Nu, the ancient keeper of the Jedi archives, somehow alive despite reports of her death during the Purge. Karmun Koli, a Duros knight who had served as a pilot during the war. Zule Shis, a former Padawan who had been too young to take the trials when Order 66 came. The others were strangers, survivors he had never met or could not place. They watched him with expressions that ranged from relief to suspicion to outright hostility. Quinlan Voss, Jocasta Nu said, her voice still carrying the authority of the old order despite the weathered robes and the blaster she held with surprising steadiness. We heard you were dead, then we heard you were alive, then we heard nothing for years, and now you walk into our sanctuary as though you have every right to be here. Explain yourself. I need help, Quinlan said simply. There was no point in dancing around it. There's something on Coruscant, something I can't stop alone. Something that's outside the Force and completely unkillable and feeding on the population like they're cattle. If we don't act, if we don't find a way to contain or destroy it, it will spread. And when it spreads, when it establishes itself beyond the underlevels, the galaxy will have a predator it was never meant to face. You're talking about the vampire, Karmun said. His voice was flat. Matter of fact, we've heard the reports, read the intelligence, beings drained of blood, bodies arranged in patterns, a man in red who laughs at death. We thought it was propaganda, some new imperial psychological weapon designed to destabilize the underworld. It's real, Quinlan said. I've fought him. Twice. Nearly died both times. He calls himself Alucard, and he's older than the Republic, stronger than anything I've encountered, and completely beyond my ability to kill. But he's not invincible. He can be hurt. Scattered, disrupted. There has to be a way to stop him permanently. I need access to the archives, to whatever records Jocasta managed to save, to anything that might explain what he is and how he was created. Jocasta Nu's expression remained skeptical. And what makes you think I would give a fallen Jedi access to sacred knowledge? You worked with Dooku, Voss. You touched the dark side willingly. You survived when better Jedi died. Some would say you only live because you compromised everything the Order stood for. Quinlan felt anger kindle in his chest. He tamped it down. I did what I had to do to survive, just like you. Just like everyone in this chamber. If that makes me fallen, then fine. I'm fallen. But I'm still here. Still fighting. Still trying to protect people from threats they can't even comprehend. So either help me, or tell me to leave so I can go back to failing on my own. Silence filled the chamber. The survivors looked at each other, communicating through glances and Force impressions. Finally, Jocasta Nu lowered her blaster. Very well. I'll grant you access to what remains of the archives, but understand this, Voss. If I discover you're working with this vampire, if I find even a hint that you've been compromised by whatever dark power he represents, I will kill you myself. The Order may be broken, but its principles endure. We do not suffer the darkness to corrupt what remains. Understood, Quinlan said. She led him deeper into the ruins, past chambers that had been converted into living quarters and study spaces, toward a vault that hummed with the subtle energy of preservation fields. Inside, stacked on shelves that seemed too fragile to hold them, were datacrons and holocrons and physical books salvaged from the Jedi Temple before it burned. Jocasta gestured to the collection with obvious pride. Not everything, not even a fraction of what we lost, but enough to preserve the essential knowledge. What are you looking for, specifically? Anything about beings that exist outside the Force, Quinlan said. Immortals, predators that feed on life essence, ancient species from the unknown regions, Rakatan experiments, Sith alchemy, anything that might explain something that can regenerate from complete destruction. Jocasta's expression shifted from skepticism to interest. That's quite specific. Give me 3 hours. She was true to her word. 3 hours later, she returned with a stack of datacrons and a single ancient tome bound in some kind of treated leather that might have been human skin. She laid them out on a reading table with reverence. I found references in 5 different sources, none of them conclusive, but there are patterns. Stories that repeat across cultures separated by millennia and kiloparsecs. Would you like the academic summary or the practical one? Practical. Very well. She activated the first datacron, projecting a holographic display of text in Old Galactic. 10,000 years ago, before the Republic, before the Jedi Order as we know it, there were species that fed on what we call the Force, but they called life essence or soul fire or 100 other names. They were apex predators in a galaxy that was still wild and dangerous, and they nearly drove several sentient species to extinction before the Rakata enslaved them and forced them into the unknown regions. Most died out. Some adapted. A few, according to legend, transcended, became something that could not die because they were already dead, sustained by the life they consumed rather than by their own biological processes. She activated another datacron. This one showed symbols that made Quinlan's head ache to look at. The Sith encountered them during their expansion into the unknown regions, made pacts with some, experimented on others. Darth Vitiate himself is rumored to have sought their secrets, hoping to achieve immortality through a similar transformation. He failed, or chose a different path, but his holocrons contain references to what he called the Bloodborne, creatures that existed in the space between life and death, that could be destroyed but never killed, that fed on blood and fear and the death of others. She closed the datacrons and opened the ancient tome. The pages were yellowed and brittle, covered in handwritten script that shifted between languages. This is more recent. A journal kept by a Jedi consular who investigated dark side cults during the New Sith Wars. She encountered a cult that worshipped something they called the No-Life King, a being that had existed since before recorded history, that appeared in different forms across different eras, always bringing death and transformation. The consular believed it was a single entity that had learned to navigate hyperspace without a ship, moving between systems through methods she could not explain. She tried to track it, tried to study it. Her journal ends abruptly. She was found dead in her quarters with her blood drained and a smile on her face. Quinlan felt ice form in his veins. Alucard. She met Alucard. Perhaps. Or something like him. The galaxy is vast. Vos. What seems unique might simply be rare. Jocasta closed the tome gently. Here's what I can tell you with certainty. These beings, if they truly exist beyond legend, are not Force users in any traditional sense. They are parasites. They draw power from the death of others, transforming consumed life into their own sustenance. They can be disrupted, scattered, reduced to their component parts. But as long as those parts retain even a fragment of consciousness, they will eventually regenerate. The only permanent solution, according to the sources, is complete metaphysical annihilation. You would need to destroy not just the body but the essence that animates it, the will that holds the fragments together. How? I don't know, Jocasta admitted. The sources don't agree. Some suggest overwhelming force light, the kind that masters like Yoda or Mace Windu might have been capable of generating. Others suggest finding the source of the transformation, the original curse or ritual that created the first vampire, and undoing it retroactively through Sith alchemy or temporal manipulation. Most admit it's probably impossible and recommend avoiding such beings entirely. Quinlan ran his hands through his hair, frustration mounting. So you're telling me I'm fighting something that's been terrorizing the galaxy for millennia, that survived encounters with Jedi Masters and Sith Lords, that has no known weakness, and the best advice you can offer is to stay away from it? I'm telling you the truth, Jocasta said firmly. I'm sorry it's not the answer you wanted, but knowledge without context is dangerous, and in this case, the context is clear. You are overmatched. This creature, this Alucard, has survived epochs that would make our current conflicts seem like footnotes. If he wanted you dead, you would be dead. The fact that you're alive suggests he has some purpose for you. Some use he intends to extract. I would advise extreme caution and the consideration that sometimes the wisest course is strategic retreat. I can't retreat, Quinlan said. He's already started creating followers, already experimenting with transformation. If I don't stop him now, while he's still establishing himself, then in a year or 10 or 100, the galaxy will face an army of unkillable predators that feed on sentient life. I have to try. Jocasta studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded, a gesture of respect if not agreement. Then I will give you one more thing, a tool that might help, though I cannot guarantee its efficacy. She reached into her robes and withdrew a small crystal, no larger than her thumb, that pulsed with soft white light. This is a purified kyber crystal, not attuned to any individual, not corrupted by the dark side, pure expression of the Force itself. Some masters believed that such crystals could disrupt beings that existed outside the Force's natural flow, could act as anchors that forced them back into metaphysical reality where normal rules applied. It's never been tested against something like your vampire, but it's all I have to offer. Quinlan took the crystal. It was warm in his palm, almost alive, its light pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Jocasta said. You may be walking to your death, and if you are, then this crystal will only serve as a very expensive burial marker. Quinlan left Dantooine with the crystal and a holocron containing everything Jocasta had been able to compile about the Bloodborne and their ilk. He traveled back to Coruscant with his mind racing, turning over possibilities and strategies, trying to find some angle he had missed. The purified kyber crystal might work, might serve as the metaphysical anchor Jocasta described, or it might do nothing, and he would die trying to use an unproven theory against an enemy that had perfected survival over millennia. He had no choice but to try. He found Alucard exactly where he expected to, back in the underlevels, in a cantina on level 1313 that had somehow remained open despite the violence plaguing the sector. The vampire sat at the bar, a glass of something red in his hand that might have been wine or blood, surrounded by a crowd that gave him nervous space. He looked up as Quinlan entered, his red eyes catching the neon light, and smiled. Quinlan, how was your trip? Did the archives provide enlightenment? How did you know I went to Dantooine? Quinlan asked, keeping his distance, his hand near his lightsaber. I can smell the grasslands on you, smell the ancient stone and the presence of other Force users. You forget, I've been hunting for a very long time. I've learned to read the signs. Alucard took a sip from his glass, his expression thoughtful. So you consulted with your fellow survivors, researched my nature, discovered that I'm essentially unkillable through conventional means, and yet you came back. Fascinating. Tell me, did they give you a weapon? Some mystical artifact that's supposed to finally put me down? Quinlan drew the purified kyber crystal from his pocket. It pulsed brighter in Alucard's presence, as though responding to the vampire's unnatural existence. The crowd around them began to disperse, sensing danger in the way predators sense the approach of larger predators. Alucard set down his glass, stood, walked toward Quinlan with measured steps. A purified crystal. How quaint. You think that will work, Jedi? You think the Force, which has no claim on me, can somehow be weaponized to drag me back into its dominion? I think it's worth trying, Quinlan said. Then try. Quinlan channeled the force through the crystal. He opened himself completely, let the living energy flow through him without reservation, focused it through the crystal as though it were a lens concentrating sunlight into a burning point. The crystal flared, brilliant white, casting shadows that seemed to scream as they fled from its radiance. He thrust it toward Alucard, releasing the accumulated energy in a pulse that lit up the entire cantina like a supernova. The force surged, the crystal sang. Reality itself seemed to bend around the vampire as the metaphysical anchor took hold, trying to drag him back into the natural order, trying to force him to conform to laws he had transcended. Alucard stood in the center of the storm, his coat whipping in winds that existed only on spiritual planes. His body began to flicker, phasing between solid and shadow, his form destabilizing as the force fought to reclaim him. For a moment, just a moment, Quinlan allowed himself to hope. Then Alucard laughed. It was a sound of pure delight, undiminished by the assault, and he reached out with one hand to touch the crystal. His fingers closed around it, and the white light died. The force recoiled. Alucard held the crystal up to the neon light, examining it with academic interest. Remarkable. I can feel it trying to pull me in, trying to make me part of the cosmic dance. But here's the thing, Jedi. I don't want to dance. I left that floor a long time ago. He closed his fist. The crystal shattered, fragmenting into dust that drifted to the floor like snow. Your force is powerful. It binds your galaxy together, gives it structure and meaning and all the comforting illusions beings need to sleep at night, but it has no authority over me. I am the exception that proves your rule. The void your philosophy cannot explain. And no matter how many artifacts you bring, how many theories you test, the answer will always be the same. You cannot kill what is already dead. Quinlan felt something inside him break. Not his body, not even his spirit, his belief. The last shred of conviction that had kept him fighting through years of darkness and compromise. If the Force itself could not touch Alucard, if millennia of Jedi wisdom offered no solution, then what was the point? What was he doing except delaying the inevitable, feeding false hope to a galaxy that would eventually fall to this predator's hunger? The thoughts were dark, seductive. They whispered that surrender was wisdom, that pragmatism demanded acceptance of defeat. There it is, Alucard said softly. He was close now, close enough that Quinlan could feel the cold that radiated from him. That moment of realization, that dawning understanding that you've been fighting a battle you cannot win. I've seen it before, in the eyes of paladins and prophets and heroes who believed they were chosen by destiny to stop me. They all break eventually. The only question is what they do after. What do you want from me? Quinlan asked. His voice was hollow. I want you to stop lying to yourself, Alucard said. Stop pretending you're still the Jedi you were before the galaxy betrayed you. Stop clinging to codes and creeds that your own order abandoned when it mattered most. You've touched the darkness, Voss. You've killed in its name. You've compromised and sacrificed and done terrible things to survive. Own it. Embrace it. Let me show you what you could become if you stopped apologizing for being a predator in a galaxy of prey. And if I refuse? Alucard smiled. Then I'll wait. I'm very good at waiting, and eventually, when the weight of your failures becomes too much to bear, when the guilt drives you to madness or despair, when you finally understand that there is no redemption for what you've become, you'll come to me. You'll beg me to take away the pain, and I'll grant you that mercy, because unlike your Force, I understand that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a broken thing is to help it stop pretending it can be fixed. He turned and walked toward the cantina's exit. Over his shoulder, he called back one final time. I'll be at the old starship graveyard on level 43. Tomorrow at midnight. Come alone. Come armed. Come ready to finally choose between the light that burns you and the darkness that promises peace. Or don't come at all and spend the rest of your miserable life knowing you had the chance to transcend and chose mediocrity instead. Then he was gone, leaving Quinlan alone in a cantina that had emptied around them, surrounded by overturned chairs and spilled drinks, and the knowledge that he had one last choice to make. The choice that would define whether Quinlan Vos survived as himself or died as something else entirely. The Starship graveyard on level 43 was a monument to entropy. Hundreds of vessels, from ancient hammerhead cruisers to Clone War-era frigates, lay scattered across a Duracrete plain the size of a small city. They were gutted things, stripped of weapons and drives and anything valuable, their hulls rusted and their corridors home to vermin and desperate squatters. Quinlan walked among them at midnight, his lightsaber in hand but not ignited, his senses stretched through the Force to their limit. Alucard was here. He felt the vampire's presence like a wound, a dead spot in the living energy that should have filled this place. He found him atop a crashed Republic cruiser, sitting on the bridge with his legs dangling over the viewport, staring out at the graveyard with an expression of melancholy. He did not turn as Quinlan climbed the wreckage to join him. "I used to command ships," he said, his voice distant. "In another life, another reality. I forget the details sometimes. Forget what it felt like to have subordinates and missions and a purpose beyond feeding. Do you ever forget, Jedi? Forget what it was like when the galaxy made sense?" "Every day," Quinlan admitted. He sat beside Alucard, leaving space between them but not drawing his weapon. "I dream about the temple, about training with younglings, about believing that we were the good ones, that our cause was just, that the Force would guide us to victory. Then I wake up and remember what actually happened, that we failed, that we were betrayed by the very clone army we fought beside, that the Sith won and the galaxy cheered." "At least you had something to believe in once," Alucard said. "Even if it was a lie, even if it crumbled under scrutiny, you had the experience of faith." "I don't remember ever believing in anything except my own hunger, my own need to survive and feed and continue existing even when existence became torture. It's lonely, Vos, being what I am, being trapped outside the natural order, watching civilizations rise and fall while I remain static and unchanging and eternally, crushingly bored." Quinlan looked at him, really looked, and for the first time he saw past the monster, past the predator, to the profound sadness that lived beneath. Alucard was not evil in any traditional sense. He was trapped, cursed, locked into an existence he hated but could not escape, seeking either death or meaning and finding neither. "Why did you come to this galaxy? If you've been wandering reality for so long, why here? Why now?" "Because I felt something," Alucard said. He reached out, his hand hovering in the air as though feeling for invisible currents. "A disturbance, a great shattering of the cosmic order. Your Jedi died all at once, their lights extinguished in a coordinated massacre that sent ripples through dimensions I can't explain. It was beautiful, tragic, and it suggested that this galaxy might finally offer me what I've been seeking, either a worthy opponent who could grant me death, or a worthy student who could help me find meaning in immortality. You want me to be your student. I want you to be my equal," Alucard corrected. "Not a servant, not a thrall. An immortal companion who can walk beside me through eternity and share the burden of existence. Someone who understands darkness, not as an enemy to be fought, but as a truth to be accepted. You have the potential, Vos. I've seen it, felt it. You're already halfway there, teetering on the edge of becoming something new. All you need is a final push." Quinlan felt the offer wrap around him like silk, seductive, logical, a solution to the exhaustion that had been building since Order 66, since the Clone Wars, since the first time he had compromised his principles in the name of strategic necessity. He could accept, could let Alucard transform him into something that could not be killed, could not fail, could not feel the crushing weight of survivor's guilt, he would lose his connection to the Force. But what had the Force done for him except make him complicit in suffering? He would gain power beyond measure, would never have to choose again, would be free. "No," he said. The word surprised him. It surprised Alucard too, judging by the way the vampire's expression shifted from confidence to confusion. "No? After everything you've endured, everything I've shown you about the futility of your path, you still refuse?" "I refuse," Quinlan said. He stood, his hand finding his lightsaber, his body settling into a ready stance. "Because I finally understand something. You're not stronger than me. You're just older, more experienced, more willing to surrender to the darkness. But you're not free, Alucard. You're the most imprisoned being I've ever met, trapped in a cycle of violence you can't escape because you've forgotten how to want anything except death or power. I'm not going to let you trap me the same way." Alucard stood as well, his melancholy evaporating, replaced by something colder, harder. "You think you can still fight me? After everything? After I've proven again and again that your power is insufficient?" "I can't kill you," Quinlan admitted, "but I can stop you. I can make this galaxy so inhospitable, so dangerous for you, that you'll choose to leave rather than face a war that never ends. And I can start by making sure your cultists, your experiments, your entire operation in the underlevels is exposed and eliminated." Bold words. Alucard's coat began to ripple, shadows pooling around his feet. "Let's see if you can back them up." They clashed in a battle that shook the graveyard. Quinlan fought with everything he had learned, every technique and dirty trick and force power he had accumulated through years of survival. He channeled lightning, not the Sith variant, but the rare blue lightning that came from intense emotional conviction rather than hatred. It washed over Alucard in crackling waves that made the vampire's form flicker and phase. He used telekinesis to hurl entire ship sections at his opponent, created barriers of solid force energy that lasted for precious seconds before being shattered by Alucard's strength. He fought with his lightsaber and his fists and improvised weapons grabbed from the wreckage, never letting up, never giving Alucard time to recover or counterattack. And slowly, impossibly, he began to gain ground. Not because he was stronger, not because the Force gave him an advantage, but because Alucard was holding back. The vampire fought with enthusiasm but not genuine intent to kill, his strikes calculated to wound rather than obliterate, his counters precise enough to be impressive but not devastating. He was testing Quinlan, measuring him, trying to force the Jedi into that final transformation through pressure and pain rather than seduction. Quinlan realized this halfway through the battle and changed his strategy. He stopped trying to hurt Alucard and started trying to escape, using his mobility and the graveyard's terrain to create distance, to move toward the edge where he could disappear into the underlevels. Alucard gave chase, his form shifting between solid and shadow, his laughter echoing across the wreckage. "Run, little Jedi. Run and prove that all your talk of standing firm was just more empty philosophy." Quinlan led him into a trap he had prepared before arriving, a section of graveyard where he had placed demolition charges, scavenged from abandoned weapon caches, enough explosives to level a city block. He triggered them as Alucard closed the distance, and the world dissolved into fire and thunder. The detonation was cataclysmic, ship hulls vaporized, Duracrete melted, the shockwave rolled across the graveyard like a tsunami, shattering viewports and collapsing structures that had stood for decades. When the smoke cleared, Quinlan stood at the edge of the blast zone, battered but alive, his robes smoking. Alucard was gone. Scattered across hundreds of meters of burning wreckage, his form reduced to ash and shadow that drifted on superheated winds. Quinlan did not wait to see if he would regenerate. He ran, fled into the underlevels through maintenance tunnels and forgotten passages, moving with the desperate speed of a man who knew his enemy would reform and come hunting. He made it to a safe house on level 2500, a small apartment maintained under a false identity. He collapsed inside, his body screaming, his connection to the Force depleted to the point of non-existence. He slept for 16 hours, dreamless and deep, his unconscious mind too exhausted even for nightmares. When he woke, he found a message waiting on his datapad, a single line of text from an unknown sender. "Well played, but this changes nothing. I'll find you. And next time, I won't be so gentle. Enjoy your brief victory. You've earned it." Quinlan deleted the message. He packed his few possessions, and he began planning his next move. He could not stay on Coruscant, could not face Alucard again without better preparation and more resources. He needed allies, needed weapons, needed to find others who had encountered beings like the vampire and survived to tell the tale. It would take time, resources, luck. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Quinlan felt something other than despair. He felt determination. The war between the Jedi and the vampire had only just begun, and Quinlan Vos intended to see it through, no matter how long it took, no matter what it cost. Because some monsters needed to be fought, not because victory was certain, but because the alternative was surrender. And surrender was the one thing he would never give Alucard. Weeks became months. Quinlan moved through the galaxy like a shadow, following leads and rumors, tracking down anyone who might have knowledge of beings that existed outside the Force. He found a Chiss sage on a frozen moon who spoke of the far outsiders, extragalactic species that had no connection to the Force and could not be sensed through it. He found a Night Sister coven on Dathomir that knew rituals to bind immortals, though they refused to share them with an outsider. He found a Sith holocron in a black market dealer's vault that contained fragments of Vitiate's research into the Bloodborne, though the information was incomplete and maddeningly vague. He learned, he adapted, and he began to understand that Alucard was not unique, was not the only predator of his kind. The galaxy had encountered such beings before, had developed methods to contain or banish them, even if permanent destruction remained impossible. The key was finding the source, the origin point, the ritual or curse or accident that had created the first vampire and allowed the curse to propagate across reality. If he could find that, if he could trace Alucard back to his beginning, then perhaps he could find a way to undo what had been done. It was a thin hope, but it was hope nonetheless. His search eventually led him to a derelict space station orbiting a dead star in the outer rim. The station was ancient, its design predating the Republic, its corridors marked with symbols that matched those in the Sith holocron he had found. This was a Rakatan facility, a place where experiments had been conducted during the height of their infinite empire, when they had ruled the galaxy through both technology and dark side mastery. Quinlan explored the station with weapons ready and senses stretched, half expecting traps or guardians or worse. What he found was a library. Not a traditional library, but a repository of genetic material and consciousness imprints preserved in stasis fields. Hundreds of beings, maybe thousands, locked in suspended animation or reduced to their essential components, arranged in rows that stretched into darkness. Labels marked each container in Old Galactic, categorizing the specimens by species and abilities. Quinlan moved through the rows, his stomach churning, until he found a section labeled Bloodborne Failed Subjects. The containers here held beings that were clearly vampiric, pale, fanged, their features preserved in expressions of agony or ecstasy, but they were incomplete, unstable. Their forms flickered in and out of focus, even in stasis, their essence degrading despite the Rakatan preservation technology. Quinlan studied them, trying to understand what he was seeing, when he felt a familiar presence. "You're persistent," I'll give you that. He spun, lightsaber igniting, and found Alucard standing in the doorway. The vampire was immaculate as always, his red coat pristine, his expression one of impressed curiosity. How did you find this place? It took me decades to locate, and I had the advantage of being able to survive the void between stars. Yet here you are, stumbling into it through sheer stubborn determination. I'm almost proud. Get away from me, Quinlan said, falling into a defensive stance. Peace, Jedi. I'm not here to fight. I'm here because I'm curious. Alucard walked into the chamber, his gaze sweeping across the rows of failed subjects. I've been here before, studied these poor wretches. They were the Rakata's attempts to create soldiers who could survive anything, warriors who could not be killed and would fight eternally for their empire. Most of the experiments failed. The subjects either died screaming or went mad or transformed into something too unstable to be useful. A handful succeeded. He gestured to himself with a mocking bow. I am one of those successes. Proof that with enough cruelty and determination, you can force biology to transcend its limits. So you were created by the Rakata, Quinlan said. You're not ancient. You're their slave soldier. Was their soldier? Alucard corrected. I broke free during the Rakatan collapse, killed my masters, wandered the galaxy feeding on their descendants, eventually found ways to leave this reality entirely and explore others. It's been quite the journey. But yes, if you want to reduce my existence to its origins, I am nothing more than a science experiment that outlived its creators. Quinlan felt pieces clicking into place. If the Rakata created you, then their technology might be able to unmake you. These stasis fields, this preservation system, it's designed to contain beings like you. If I could trap you in one, seal you away, then even if I can't kill you, I could remove you from the galaxy permanently. Alucard's smile widened. Very good. You've finally found a solution. Theoretical. Risky. Requiring you to somehow overpower me and force me into a container designed for subjects who were already subdued. But possible. So what's stopping you? Why aren't you attacking? Why aren't you trying to execute your plan? Because I'd have to get close to you, Quinlan said. And the moment I try, you'll kill me. True. But perhaps there's another way. Alucard walked to one of the containers, studying the being inside with clinical interest. I told you I was seeking a worthy opponent or a worthy student. I've tested you multiple times now, pushed you to your limits, tried to break you or seduce you or force you into transformation. And you've resisted every attempt, clung to your convictions even as they dragged you down. It's admirable. Frustrating, but admirable. So I'm going to make you an offer. One final offer, because despite everything, I find myself respecting you too much to simply destroy you. He turned to face Quinlan, his expression serious. I will let you trap me, will surrender to this container, and allow you to seal me away. But in exchange, you must promise me something. Promise that you will never stop seeking, never stop learning, never allow yourself to become complacent or comfortable. The galaxy needs predators like you, Voss. Beings who have touched the darkness and understand its necessity, who can make the hard choices that idealists refuse to acknowledge. Promise me you'll keep fighting, keep surviving, keep being the thorn in the side of every tyrant and warlord who assumes the weak exist only to be devoured. Quinlan lowered his lightsaber. Why would you do this? Why surrender after everything? Because I'm tired, Alucard said simply. Because I've been hunting and feeding and killing for longer than you can imagine, and I've finally found something resembling a purpose. You gave that to me, whether you realize it or not. By refusing to break, by insisting there was a better way, you reminded me that existence can be more than endless repetition. So I'm going to give you this victory, give this galaxy a reprieve from my presence, and in a few centuries, when the seal weakens or some fool releases me, I'll return. And perhaps by then, you or your descendants will have found a way to actually kill me. Won't that be interesting? He walked to an empty stasis container and climbed inside with surprising grace. Lay down as though settling into a comfortable bed. Do it quickly, before I change my mind. Quinlan moved to the control panel, his hands shaking. He activated the containment field, watched as it enveloped Alucard in blue light, watched as the vampire's form began to slow and still, suspended in a moment between life and death. Before the seal completed, Alucard spoke one last time, his voice already distant. "Remember your promise, Jedi. Don't let my sacrifice be wasted on mediocrity." Then he was frozen, silent, trapped in a prison that would hold him for as long as the Rakatan technology endured. Quinlan stood before the container for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. He had won, not through power or strategy or the intervention of the Force, but through persistence, through refusing to give up even when victory seemed impossible, through being the kind of person Alucard could respect enough to surrender to. He left the station with the coordinates locked in his datapad, ready to share with other Jedi if needed, ready to ensure the location remained secret from those who might try to release the vampire. He returned to the galaxy changed, not redeemed, not cleansed of his darkness, but more certain of his path. He would continue fighting, would continue surviving, would honor the promise he had made to a monster who had taught him that sometimes the greatest victories came not from destroying your enemy, but from understanding them well enough to find common ground. The Force whispered approval, and for once, Quinlan Vos chose to believe it. Years passed. The galaxy healed. The Empire's remnants scattered. New hope emerged in the form of reformers and idealists who believed the mistakes of the past could be avoided. Quinlan watched from the shadows, no longer a Jedi in any official sense, but still serving their ideals in his own way. He trained those who needed training, protected those who needed protection. And occasionally, very occasionally, he visited that derelict station and checked the containment field, making sure the seal held, making sure the galaxy remained safe from the predator it had briefly faced. The container glowed blue and steady. Alucard remained frozen, a smile still on his lips, waiting for the day when someone would make the mistake of releasing him and the hunt could begin again. But that day would not come soon. And for now, that was enough.